What if a sound could make you dance to death? In Strasbourg, a euphoric plague is spreading. There is no virus, no drug, only a rhythm that won't stop. An audio scientist discovers the cause, a silent, deadly frequency. But to stop it, her instruments aren't enough. She must rely on a 500-year-old superstition and find a song of sorrow. How do you fight a curse with science when the curse itself holds the key? The silence in Dr. Kiera Hudson's lab was absolute, a manufactured void she curated with the same precision as the acoustic data on her triple monitor display. She pushed the high-end headphones back on her cropped hair, the grey strands at her temples catching the cool, clinical light. On the central screen, a jagged, chaotic waveform labelled Client Ev Shrine WAV spasmed erratically. Kiera's fingers moved with practiced economy across her keyboard, her expression one of bored concentration. She dragged a digital scalpel through the audio, isolating the peak of the waveform, magnifying it, running it through a series of filters. Slowly, the chaotic scribble of noise resolved into a recognizable pattern, a sonic signature as unique as a fingerprint. A small, self-satisfied smile touched Kiera's lips. She leaned into the professional-grade microphone on her desk, her voice a crisp, dispassionate alto. Case file 734. Conclusion. Client claim of a demonic shriek recorded at a roadside memorial is definitively debunked. She took a deliberate sip of coffee from a mug that had long gone cold. The vocalization is a clear match for Tyto alba, a common barn owl, likely startled. The so-called disembodied whispers are standard signal artifacts caused by wind shear against the client's low-quality recording device. She clicked save, archiving the file. On a secondary monitor, a grainy, pixelated photo showed a blurry shape hovering over a collection of weather-beaten teddy bears. The supposed ghost. Kiera stared at it for a moment, not with curiosity, but with a kind of weary pity for the people who needed to believe in such things. With a final, dismissive click, she closed the image, returning her screen to a state of orderly, empty grey. Her world was one of data, of measurable phenomena, of things that could be proven or, more often, disproven. It was a world of comforting, rational walls, and she was their master architect. Her phone buzzed, the vibration an unwelcome intrusion. She glanced at the screen. Jean-Pierre. Interpol. She sighed and accepted the video call. The face that appeared was pale and strained, the background a blur of frantic activity. Kiera. Thank God. You're not going to believe this. Jean-Pierre's voice was tight with stress. Try me, JP. Another haunted submarine. Kiera leaned back, the picture of professional detachment. Strasbourg, he said, ignoring her jab. I don't know what it is. It started 3 days ago. A few people. Now it is dozens. Maybe hundreds. Hundreds of what? People, he said, his voice dropping. They were dancing. Kiera's eyebrow arched. Dancing. You called me from an active investigation because of dancing. Not like any dancing you've ever seen, he snapped, his patience frayed. It's uncontrollable. They don't stop. They canty. They re-euphoric, smiling, but their bodies, they were tearing themselves apart. We have 27 hospitalized for extreme exhaustion, dehydration, multiple bone fractures. The first victim died of a heart attack this morning, a 19-year-old girl. The cynical humor drained from Kiera's face. A drug then. Some new psychoactive. That's what we thought. It has to be. Jean-Pierre rubbed his eyes. But the tox screens are coming back. The first dozen are all clean. Not a trace of anything known. Or unknown, for that matter. Nothing. He leaned closer to his camera. Look, Kiera, this is a long shot. A Hail Mary. But the incidents are all clustered. We thought maybe an acoustic element. A sonic weapon of some kind. Something that induces a state. Something that bypasses a standard tox screen. Kiera was already shaking her head. her skepticism returning like a reflex. She had built a career on dismantling these kinds of desperate leaps of logic. When the facts don't fit, people invent new, more exciting facts. Mass hysteria, JP, she said flatly, her voice losing its earlier warmth. It is a classic feedback loop. One person starts a bizarre behavior, social media amplifies it, and suggestible people follow suit. It's a psychological contagion, not an acoustic one. Look for a TikTok challenge, not a sound wave. Jean-Pierre looked defeated. Maybe, but if you saw it, I don't need to see it. Kiera cut him off, her tone final. The data is clear. If the tox screens are clean, it's in their heads, not in the air. But Jean-Pierre had already planted the seed, a rule-violating event, a pattern without a known cause. And despite her certainty, a sliver of professional curiosity, the part of her that loved a puzzle more than she loved being right, began to stir. The reality of Strasbourg was worse than Jean-Pierre's panicked description. The city wasn't in a state of overt chaos, but of a quiet, creeping dread. It was in the way people hurried along the cobblestone streets, the way they cast nervous glances at one another, the unnatural quiet in the squares. Kiera saw her first case standing near the Cathédrale Notre-Dame, surrounded by a helpless circle of paramedics. She was a young woman, maybe 20, drenched in sweat that plastered her hair to her forehead, and she was dancing. There was no music, only the rhythmic, agonizing scuff of her worn sneakers on the ancient stones and the sound of her own ragged, desperate breaths. Her limbs jerked and flailed in a grotesque parody of joy. Her body was a puppet, pulled by invisible strings in a frantic, ceaseless rhythm. But it was her face that made Kiera's blood run cold. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, staring at something no one else could see. And a smile, a wide, ecstatic, terrifying smile, was plastered across her face, an expression of pure bliss, even as her body convulsed in what was clearly agony. Kiera stood frozen, her carry-on bag suddenly feeling immensely heavy in her hand. This wasn't a video. This wasn't a data set. This was a human being, trapped in a horrifying paradox of euphoria and self-destruction. Her clinical detachment, the cool, rational wall she maintained between herself and the messy chaos of the world, shattered. A visceral, primal wrongness radiated from the scene, a feeling that defied analysis. For the first time in a long time, Dr. Kiera Hudson was looking at something she did not, in any way, understand, and it terrified her. The police incident room was an organized disaster. Maps covered every wall, dotted with colored pins that clustered like a viral infection in the city's historic center. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and stress. At the head of a long table, Chief Inspector Luc Deschamps radiated an aura of imposing, weary authority. He had the build of a man who missed his days on the street, and the eyes of a man drowning in paperwork. He gave Kiera a curt nod as she was introduced, his gaze sweeping over her with unconcealed skepticism. "Dr. Hudson, thank you for coming," he said, his tone suggesting the opposite. "I'll be brief. We have a city on the verge of panic, and my resources are stretched to the breaking point. We are looking for a drug dealer, Doctor, not a ghost with a boombox." His thick finger stabbed at one of the maps. "The outbreak is centered here, a 3-block radius around this construction site." He indicated a large, undeveloped square on the map marked Aperture Corp, Future HQ. 90% of the victims are students from the university nearby. They go to a club, they take something new, something we can t-test for yet. It's a simple, logical line. It's a drug. But the toxicology screens are clean, Kiera countered, her voice calm but firm. She was used to this brand of institutional inertia. Deschamps waved a dismissive hand, as if swatting away a fly. "For now, it's a new compound, a novel analog. We're working on it. My people are tracking every known dealer in the city. We will find it." He turned his back on her, addressing the room. "This is a narcotics investigation. All other theories are a distraction." He looked back at Kiera, his eyes hard. Your acoustic weapon theory is noted, Doctor, and filed. Thank you for your time. It was a clear, unequivocal dismissal. Kiera stood her ground. Inspector, the clustering could just as easily point to a localized environmental source. A frequency. A frequency, Deschamps repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. Doctor, I have a city full of people dancing themselves to death. I need handcuffs and evidence bags. When I need a lecture on sound waves, I'll buy a textbook. He turned away, leaving Kiera standing alone in the chaotic heart of an investigation that was already, with absolute certainty, heading in the wrong direction. She wasn't just fighting a mystery. She was fighting the very people who were supposed to be solving it. Being dismissed by Inspector Deschamps was, for Kiera, like a starting pistol. Official channels were closed, which meant she was now unbound by their plodding, bureaucratic pace. She had her own funding, her own equipment, and most importantly, a hypothesis that everyone else was too blind to even consider. She found a vantage point on a quiet street overlooking the sprawling wound in the earth that was the Aperture Corporation construction site. Her research van, outwardly nondescript, was a marvel of acoustic forensics inside. Her research assistant, Benoit Keller, a bright-eyed doctoral candidate from the local university, was practically vibrating with excitement. He had read all of Kiera's papers and viewed her as a legend. Parabolic microphones deployed, Dr. Hudson. Spectrum analyzers are online and calibrated, Benoit reported, his fingers flying across a bank of monitors. What exactly are we listening for? A sonic weapon would have to be loud. The air outside was a cacophony of normal construction sounds, the deep growl of an excavator, the percussive clang of steel beams, the shouts of workers. Kiera adjusted a dial, her movements economical and precise. Noise is a matter of perception, Benoit. A jet engine is loud. A whisper in a silent room is louder. She stared intently at the raw data scrolling across the screen, a waterfall of chaotic numbers. I'm not looking for something loud. I'm looking for something that shouldn't be there at all. A signal buried in the noise, a pattern in the chaos. Benoit watched her, his initial excitement tempered by a dose of academic skepticism. He believed in Dr. Hudson's methods, but the premise felt like something out of science fiction. Still, he did as he was told, initiating the first of what would be many multi-hour deep listening sessions. The van's sophisticated ears pointed directly at the heart of the construction site. The next day, Kiera left Benoit monitoring the equipment and went to the temporary field hospital set up in a local gymnasium. The air was heavy with the smell of antiseptic and fear. Here, the dancers were no longer dancing. They were silent, motionless figures in hospital beds, many in medically induced comas to stop their bodies from tearing themselves apart. Kiera found the father of one of the victims, a young man named Leo. The father, a kind-faced man in his 50s, looked utterly broken. He sat by his son's bedside, holding a hand that was connected to a web of IV lines. The doctors, they have no answers, the man said, his voice a hoarse whisper. He didn't look at Kiera, his eyes fixed on his son's still face. They say his heart is strained, his muscles are torn. They ask what he took. He took nothing. My Leo, he wouldn't have. Kiera's own expression was carefully neutral, a professional mask she wore to insulate herself from the grief she so often encountered. She switched on the small digital recorder in her hand. Can you tell me what happened? From the beginning, the father took a shaky breath. He was home from university, in his room. He just started humming. A low sound, in his chest. I asked if he was all right. He said he'd never felt better. A tear traced a path through the stubble on his cheek. Then he started to move, just tapping his foot at first, then his shoulders. He was smiling. He looked so happy, you see. That's the awful part. He looked truly, blissfully happy. Kiera leaned forward slightly. This was the crucial moment. Did he say he heard anything? Any music? The man finally turned to look at her, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading confusion. He shook his head slowly. No. I asked him that. I asked what he was dancing to. He paused, his brow furrowed as he tried to recall the exact words. He said he didn't hear it. He said he felt it, like a vibration deep inside, like a vibration in his bones. Kiera's mask of neutrality didn't slip, but behind her eyes, a critical variable slotted into place. Felt. A vibration in the bones. It was the emotional, non-scientific description of a physical phenomenon. It was exactly what she needed. Night fell over Strasbourg. Inside the research van, the atmosphere was thick with tension and the bitter aroma of burnt coffee. Hours of data had been collected, analyzed, and discarded. Benoit's earlier enthusiasm had curdled into weary frustration. "Doctor, with respect, we have 16 hours of ambient noise," he said, stifling a yawn. "We've isolated every anomalous frequency, a faulty generator from the worksite, a feedback loop from the tram line, even a subsonic resonance from the cathedral's bell tower. Nothing is continuous. Nothing is powerful enough." He gestured at the screen. "It's just noise." Kiera didn't answer. She was staring at a section of the timeline, her eyes narrowed in fierce concentration. She had seen something, a ghost in the machine. "Filter out everything above 25 Hz, she commanded, her voice low and tense. "Everything? But that's all of audible sound," Benoit protested. "Do it." He typed in the command. The chaotic waveforms on the screen vanished, replaced by an almost flat line. The representation of silence, but it wasn't perfect. Kiera pointed a steady finger at a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in the baseline. "There. Isolate that. Amplify it." Benoit followed her instructions, his skepticism obvious. He highlighted the section, entered the command, and the screen redrew, and they both froze. In the digital silence, a new waveform appeared. It was unlike anything they had seen before. It wasn't jagged or chaotic. It was a perfect, clean sine wave, pulsing with a slow, powerful, and unnervingly stable rhythm. Its frequency hovered at a steady 18.9 Hz, deep within the range of infrasound, far below the threshold of human hearing. It was a pure, powerful, silent signal that had been hiding beneath the noise of the city all along. "My God," Benoit breathed, leaning so close to the monitor his nose almost touched the glass. "It's been there the whole time." Kiera felt a cold thrill of discovery, the vindication of a scientist who has found proof. "There you are," she whispered to the glowing green line. But Benoit's scientific mind was already racing, moving from discovery to implication. He shook his head, turning to face her. "But doctor, this doesn't make sense. Infrasound at this level, the literature is clear. It can cause disorientation, anxiety, nausea, a general feeling of dread. It is the reason some places are perceived as haunted. It can make people euphoric. It can't make people dance to death." He was right. The signal was the weapon, the smoking gun. But the ballistics made no sense. It was a bullet that should have made the victim sick, not made them fall in love with their own destruction. Kiera stared at the perfect pulsing wave on the screen. The signal was a scientific fact, but its effect was something else entirely, something that broke the established rules. A chilling new thought began to dawn, a hypothesis far more frightening than any sonic weapon. "Maybe," she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the van's electronics. "This frequency can." Kiera felt the cold, thrilling certainty of a scientist who had found her proof. The perfect pulsing waveform on her screen was undeniable, a physical fact in a world of chaos. Armed with this data, she walked back into the police incident room, bypassing the front desk and heading straight for Chief Inspector Deschamps. He was huddled with two other officers over a map and looked up, annoyed as she approached. "Inspector?" Kiera began, holding out her tablet. "I have something you need to see. I've isolated the signal. It's a continuous high-amplitude infrasound wave originating from the construction site." She showed him the screen, the clean, malevolent sine wave pulsing with a steady rhythm. This is what's causing the phenomenon. It's not a drug, it's acoustics. Deschamps glanced at the screen for less than a second, his expression a mask of profound disinterest. He straightened up and held out his hand. In his palm was a small, clear plastic baggie containing a half-dozen tiny, bright blue pills. "This is what's causing the phenomenon, Doctor," he said, his voice flat and final. "We found these in the apartment of the latest victim, a student. We ran a preliminary field test. It's a new psychoactive compound, an amphetamine derivative we've never seen before." He dropped the baggie onto the table with an air of theatrical finality. "This is our culprit. This is what will show the press." Kiera was stunned into silence. "But that's circumstantial. The other victims had clean tox screens. This waveform is direct, empirical evidence." "Your sound theory," Deschamps interrupted, his voice dropping to a low, dismissive growl, "is officially irrelevant. Your consultation is terminated. The city thanks you for your time." He turned to an officer. "See to it that Dr. Hudson is escorted out and revoke her access to the primary site. She is no longer part of this investigation." He then walked to the front of the room, where reporters were being gathered for a press conference, ready to announce his simple, convenient lie to the world. Kiera stood alone in the center of the chaotic room, the glowing waveform on her tablet suddenly feeling useless. She had the truth in her hand, but the institution, the very system designed to find it, had actively chosen to suppress it. She was completely and utterly stonewalled. Frustration gave way to a cold, burning desperation. Kiera retreated to the one place she felt she could think, the quiet, sterile archives of the University of Strasbourg. Officially, she was off the case, but she couldn't let it go. Her science was right, but it was incomplete. The signal explained the what, but it didn't explain the why. Why this unprecedented, euphoric effect? Why this location? Why now? She sat at a terminal, her laptop open, and began to search, not for acoustic papers or scientific journals, but for history. She typed in keywords: Strasbourg, mass hysteria, plague, uncontrollable dancing. Her screen filled with results, mostly pop psychology articles and conspiracy theories. But then one link caught her eye, an entry in a digitized academic journal. The Choreomania of 1518, a study in historical recurrence. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She read about a woman named Frau Trophäa, who began dancing in a street in Strasbourg over 500 years ago. Within a month, hundreds had joined her, dancing until they collapsed from strokes, heart attacks, and sheer exhaustion. The symptoms described in the 16th century chronicles were not just similar, they were identical. The timeline, the progression from euphoria to death, the lack of any known cause. It was a perfect mirror. As she descended deeper into this digital rabbit hole of historical accounts, one name kept appearing in the citations, often with parenthetical notes like unorthodox or controversial. Dr. Alaric Dubois. A search for his name brought up a string of articles accusing him of academic fraud, of mixing folklore with fact. He was a disgraced historian, ostracized by his peers for his fringe theories about curses, soil memory, and cyclical phenomena. He was, Kiera realized with a jolt, the historical version of her. An outcast with a theory nobody wanted to believe. Dubois' study was not a study. It was a dragon's hoard of knowledge, a chaotic sanctuary overflowing with towering stacks of books, scrolls, and yellowed maps. The air smelled of old paper, leather, and dust. Dr. Alaric Dubois himself sat behind a massive oak desk, a man in his 70s with a wild mane of white hair and the piercing, intense eyes of a true believer. He didn't seem surprised to see her, as if he had been expecting a visitor. "Dr. Hudson," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. He gestured to a worn leather chair. "Please." Kiera sat, feeling like an intruder in a world far older than her own. "You know who I am?" "I know what you are," Dubois corrected gently. "You are this cycle's voice of reason, struggling to be heard. He smiled, a sad, knowing expression. They called Frau Troffea a lunatic in 1518 when she tried to explain the rhythm she felt. I imagine they call you the same. Kiera, taken aback, decided to dispense with pleasantries. She explained everything: the dancers, the police, the infrasound signal she had discovered. Dubois listened patiently, nodding, his gaze never leaving her face. When she finished, he rose and walked to a large wooden chest. He pulled out a massive, hand-drawn map of 16th century Strasbourg and carefully unrolled it on his desk. "Your science is excellent, Doctor," he said, his finger tracing a path through the old city on the map. "You have found the weapon, the what, but you are like a detective who finds a dagger, yet does not ask why it was plunged into that specific heart, in that specific room." He tapped the map. This was the path of the 1518 plague. It started here, with Frau Troffea. It gathered followers along this route, and it ended here. His finger rested on a large square marked as a marketplace. A final, terrible crescendo. The authorities at the time believed it was a curse from a slighted saint. They were wrong, of course, but they were also right. Kiera frowned. "That's a contradiction." "No," Dubois said, his eyes gleaming with passion. "It's a paradox. Science looks for a single, repeatable cause. It's your strength and your blindness. You ignore the pattern, the story, the why. This thing, this frequency, is not just a random phenomenon. It is bound to this land, to this specific path. The curse, the legend, is merely the story people have told for 500 years to remember the scientific truth they couldn't possibly understand." The synthesis happened that night, back in the humming confines of the research van. Benoit watched, his skepticism having returned in full force after Kiera's story about the disgraced historian, but he did as she asked. Kiera scanned Dubois' ancient map, digitizing the route he had shown her. Then, with a few keystrokes, she overlaid it onto her own modern data-driven map of the infrasound propagation. The two images merged, and the breath caught in Benoit's throat. It was a perfect match. The lines were not just similar, they were identical. The hotspots where Kiera had detected the strongest infrasound readings corresponded exactly to the locations on the 16th century map where the chronicles reported the most dancers had gathered. The epicenter of her scientific data was the exact location of the construction site, which, on the old map, was a patch of unconsecrated ground where the first victim, Frau Troffea, was said to be buried. It was a level of correlation that was statistically impossible. "It's not random," Kiera breathed, staring at the merged maps, a ghost from the past overlaid on the science of the present. "It's a roadmap." Benoit could only stare, his face pale in the glow of the monitor, every ounce of his scientific certainty shattered. A 500-year-old roadmap. As if on cue, a series of shrill alarms blared from their monitoring equipment. Red alert icons flooded the screen. Benoit's hands flew to the keyboard. Doctor seismic sensors, acoustic detectors. They're all spiking. There's a massive energy surge and it's synchronized. He brought up a live news feed. The camera showed a wide shot of Place Kleber, the city's main square. It was filled with people, hundreds of them, all moving in a jerky, synchronized, horrifying dance. It was a massive, spontaneous outbreak, far larger than anything they had seen before. Kiera looked from the nightmarish scene on the newsfeed back to the ancient map on her screen. Her finger trembled as she pointed to the endpoint of the 1518 plague's path. It was the very same square. The resonance was getting stronger, and it was following the ancient path to its deadly historical conclusion. The elation of discovery was fleeting, replaced by the cold grip of terror. The newsfeed showing the chaos at Place Kleber was a confirmation of their theory and a terrifying portent of what was to come. They fled back to the one place that felt like a sanctuary, a command center in the war against the impossible, Dubois' study. The three of them formed an unlikely, frantic trinity. Kiera, the scientist, had her laptop open, displaying geological surveys of Strasbourg, her mind racing through the physics of harmonic resonance. Benoit, the technician, his skepticism now utterly incinerated, was running frantic calculations, trying to model the energy surge they had witnessed. And Dubois, the historian, was the oracle. He hunched over a crumbling Latin chronicle from the early 16th century, its pages like dried leaves, his finger tracing the delicate, spidery script under the light of a desk lamp. The timeline of 1518 is alarmingly clear, Dubois muttered, his voice strained. The initial outbreak with Frau Trofea, the slow gathering of followers over weeks, and then the final days. The chronicler describes it here. He squinted, translating the ancient text. He says the rhythm changed. It grew deeper, more powerful. He calls it the Carmen finale, the final song. Kiera looked up from her screen. What does he mean, final? Dubois' finger trembled slightly as he continued to read. A song that sets the soul free from the body. He looked up at them, his eyes wide and dark. It's a euphemism for death, a final lethal peak. The chronicle is precise. From the moment of the great public gathering in the square, the final song would build for one full day and one full night, reaching its peak at the following dusk. Benoit stopped typing, the color draining from his face. The event at Place Kléber started an hour ago. You're saying we have less than 24 hours until this frequency becomes fatal to everyone in its range? Dubois simply nodded. The room fell silent, the weight of the deadline pressing down on them. They were no longer just a scientist, a historian, and a technician. They were a single, desperate unit, fighting a 500-year-old ghost with the tools of two different centuries. Chief Inspector Luc Deschamps watched the chaos unfold on the bank of monitors in the incident room, his face a thunderous mask of rage. His neat, tidy drug theory had been torn to shreds on live television. The mayor had called him, screaming. The media was crucifying him, painting him as incompetent, a man who hunted phantom drug dealers while his city danced itself into oblivion. His carefully constructed career was collapsing around him in real time. He needed a target. He needed someone to blame. Just then, a news anchor paused a piece of mobile phone footage from the square. In the background, for just a second, a familiar face was visible in the panicked crowd. A woman with cropped, graying hair, her expression one of horrified understanding. Dr. Kiera Hudson. Something inside Deschamps snapped. All his frustration, his professional failure, and his public humiliation found a focal point. It was her. She and her ridiculous, unprovable theories. She had undermined him, distracted him. She was the anomaly, the variable he couldn't control. She was the cause. His rational mind, backed into a corner, surrendered to the irrational comfort of a scapegoat. He turned to his deputy, his voice dangerously low. Find her. I don't care what it takes. Her consultation is over. She is a civilian interfering with a crisis situation. Find Dr. Hudson and seize all of her equipment. Treat her as a public menace. I want her and her van in custody by morning. Dubois' ancient maps provided not only a history of the phenomenon, but a guide to survival. He led them to a small, deconsecrated church that had been sealed since the 1800s, a place that lay outside the primary path of the resonance. Inside, surrounded by dust-sheeted pews, Kiera set up a makeshift lab, her equipment spread across the cold stone altar. While Benoit worked to encrypt their data and wipe their van's GPS history, Kiera was furiously modifying her own instruments. If this wave can be generated, it can be cancelled, she muttered, more to herself than to the others, her hands flying as she rewired a directional sonic emitter. Phase cancellation. We generate an identical wave, 180 degrees out of phase. The crest meets the trough. It should, in theory, create a dead zone. Silence. But how do we find the source? Benoit asked. The entire construction site is flooded with the resonance. Dubois' history and my geology, Kiera answered. She pulled up a seismic survey of the area on her laptop, displaying the bedrock composition beneath Strasbourg. She cross-referenced it with the epicenter on the ancient map. The construction pilings go deep, far deeper than any other building in the old city. According to these scans, they've bored directly into a massive, unusual geological formation. She pointed to a dense mass on the scan. It has a crystalline structure, a natural resonator, like a colossal wine glass, and the construction has been flicking it for weeks, making it ring. Dubois leaned over her shoulder, looking at the scientific scan. He then pointed to a passage in the chronicle he had brought with them. The legends called it Lapis Flevit Sancti Viti. He looked at Kiera, his eyes alight with the fire of discovery, the weeping stone of St. Vitus. It was said to lie sleeping beneath the city, and that to wake it would be to wake the city sorrow. Kiera stared at the screen, then at the ancient text. The weeping stone. A massive resonant crystal, a superstition and a scientific theory, suddenly one and the same. They had it. The source, the method, the deadline. A desperate, impossible plan began to form. They would have to get back to the construction site, find their way into the excavation below, and get close enough to the weeping stone to deploy Kiera's untested counter-frequency. They had to do it before dusk tomorrow, and they had to do it while being hunted by every police officer in the city. Dusk was bleeding across the sky, the deadline a palpable weight in the air. Under the cover of twilight, Kiera, Benoit and Dubois moved like shadows through the deserted streets surrounding the construction site. Police sirens echoed in the distance, a constant reminder that they were not only fighting the clock, but also the law. They reached the perimeter fence, and with a sharp snap from Benoit's bolt cutters, they were in. The silence inside was the most unnerving part. The daytime cacophony of machinery was gone, leaving a void that was immediately filled by something far more oppressive. The air felt thick, heavy, like wading through water. Kiera could feel it in her bones, a low, gut-wrenching hum that vibrated up through the soles of her feet and settled in her teeth. The silent song was building, just as the Chronicle had predicted. Kiera clutched the portable counter-frequency generator to her chest. It was a clumsy, makeshift device, a sonic emitter cobbled together with parts from her van, its small screen the only source of light in the encroaching darkness. It was the only weapon they had against a ghost that had haunted this land for half a millennium. The service entrance, Dubois whispered, his voice raspy. He pointed with a shaky finger toward a small, reinforced steel door set into the concrete foundation of a half-finished building, almost completely hidden by shadows. The old map marked it here, an access tunnel for the original medieval cellars. It was exactly where he said it would be. Science had led them to this fence, but superstition had shown them the door. With one last look at the city glowing unnaturally behind them, they slipped into the belly of the beast. The tunnel opened into a vast, newly excavated cavern, a colossal wound in the bedrock beneath the city. The air thrummed with a terrifying power, and in the center of the cavern, they saw it, the source, the weeping stone of St. Vitus. It was a colossal, crystalline geode, dozens of feet across, its interior split open by the deep-drilled pilings of the construction site. It wasn't a stone, it was a cathedral of quartz and amethyst, and it was alive. A faint, sickly purple light pulsed from its core, and the entire formation vibrated violently, the source of the silent, mind-breaking hum. The infrasound was overwhelming here, a physical force that pressed in on them from all sides. Kiera, Benoit gasped, his hand flying to his head. He stumbled, a slow, euphoric grin spreading across his face. His shoulders began to twitch. It feels amazing. Benoit, no! Kiera screamed, her voice barely audible over the thrumming in her own skull. Fight it! Focus on my voice! But he was already beginning to move, his feet shuffling in the first steps of the fatal dance. Kiera's heart hammered against her ribs. She raised the counter-frequency generator, her fingers flying across the keypad, trying to dial in the precise opposing frequency. The data on the screen was chaotic, the wave fluctuating wildly in the presence of this much raw power. It wasn't stable. Pure data wasn't enough. She couldn't lock on. "It's too strong," she yelled. Dubois, clutching the crumbling chronicle like a holy text, staggered toward her. "The chronicle!" he shouted over the crushing vibration. "The final passage! It said the curse yielded. It yielded to a song of sorrow." A song of sorrow. The words cut through Kiera's scientific panic. It was a poetic, emotional, utterly unscientific clue, and in that moment, she understood. She couldn't defeat this wave with cold mathematics. She had to feel it. She closed her eyes, ignoring the data on her screen, and listened not with her ears, but with her entire body. She felt the lethal, euphoric pulse of the crystal, the song of joy that was killing the city. And with her scientific knowledge guided by the ancient poetic text, she began to improvise, searching for its opposite. A low, melancholic, sorrowful frequency. A wave of grief to counter a wave of bliss. Just as she felt her fingers find the right haptic feedback on the controls, the cavern was flooded with light. "It's over, Doctor!" A voice boomed from the entrance. Chief Inspector Deschamps stood there, flanked by two armed officers, his face a mask of triumphant fury. "You are under arrest for inciting a public panic." But his triumph lasted only a second. As he and his officers stepped fully into the chamber, the full, crushing force of the resonance hit them. The two officers froze, their guns lowering as their faces went slack with a dawning, idiotic bliss. Their bodies began to jerk, their feet beginning the grotesque shuffle. Deschamps fought it. His face, contorted in a mask of pure terror and confusion, was a battleground. He tried to raise his weapon, but his arm refused to obey, twitching to a rhythm he couldn't control. His own body, the one thing he thought he could command, had betrayed him. Seeing her chance, Kiera locked onto the frequency, the song of sorrow. She slammed the button. It wasn't a sound, it was a physical event. A deafening, bone-jarring shriek of cancelling frequencies ripped through the cavern, a wave of pure silence that was louder than any noise. The weeping stone convulsed. A massive crack tore across its crystalline face. The faint, purple light within it flickered and died, and then absolute silence. The vibration was gone. In the cavern, Benoit and the two officers collapsed into heaps on the ground. Deschamps fell to his knees, panting, his face pale with the sweat of a man who had stared into an abyss he swore did not exist. And across the city of Strasbourg, under the last light of dusk, thousands of people simply stopped dancing. They fell where they stood, on cobblestone streets and in public squares, their bodies battered and exhausted, but their souls suddenly, miraculously, their own once more. The final song was over. There's a real satisfaction, isn't there, when a ghost story gets a scientific explanation? The curse of the Dancing Plague wasn't a curse at all, but a resonant crystal, an infrasound frequency. Case closed, science wins. But does it? For me, the most fascinating part of this story isn't the what, it's how they found it. The science only worked when it was guided by the superstition. Think about it. The 500-year-old map was a perfect roadmap. The legend of the weeping stone pointed directly to the source. And most importantly, the key to stopping the fatal frequency wasn't in a data log, but in a line of poetry from a forgotten chronicle, a song of sorrow. It suggests that folklore isn't just a collection of fanciful tales. Maybe it's a different kind of record-keeping, a human database of observations and warnings, encoded in the language of myth and emotion. For 500 years, the story of the curse was the most accurate explanation humanity had. Dr. Hudson's science didn't debunk that story, it just translated it. It leaves you wondering about the line between an empirical fact and a truth that's been passed down for generations. So I want to ask you, when a scientific cause creates effects that perfectly mirror a historical superstition, which story do you think is more true?